Hello, everybody. It is us. We are back. It is me, Daniel Borden, and it is him, Wyatt Claypool, except I got that reversed. I'm Wyatt, he's Daniel.
It's hard. I mean, we're basically the same person.
I wake up every day and I have to figure out what my identity is.
I have it written on my hand like Memento, like
Yeah.
the back goal Christopher Nolan. So that's how I wake up every day.
Yeah.
Daniel Bordman.
Yeah. And just like people who are confused and don't know who they are, we are going to be talking a lot about people like Justin Trudeau and a bunch of other liberals who have completely failed to, get any traction on any issue yet again. This week has been really weird.
Fundamentally live in reality is
this week has been so strange. It's been like a super like good week for the conservatives in such an odd way. Like a lot of parental rights stuff happened, a lot of positive stuff on those fronts happened. You had the liberals like just flailing around looking for any sort of like angle of attack on the conservatives. The justice minister called like Polyev an effing tool or whatever because he's against car theft. And I guess that he just is not woke to the idea that crime.
Yeah, well, why do people have cars if they don't want them to get stolen? I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Like you buy a car, it's a community car, and then you just let criminals take it and sell it overseas to Africa. Like
it was really funny. I saw some left-wing journalists that hate my guts, and they were reacting to someone.
How could they possibly hate you? You're so sweet.
I know. There are some people who were even more left than them who, when all this was reported that car thefts are way up, even though all these lefty people are being like, car thefts aren't up, they are just counting it a different way or whatever. Or they have some excuse. But this person said, car theft doesn't matter because you can just buy a new car. And it's a crime of economics. And that person probably needed a car. Like, as much as it seems like a parody, the left legitimately sees criminals as Aladdin. They are out there.
Street rat, dope rat. Just like, him and his pet monkey just trying to find a loaf of bread.
Just to give it to
bread happens to be your car.
Yeah, they're gonna cut up the justice minister's Lincoln or Kia, and they're gonna feed it to hungry kids. That's why you see people stealing televisions at Best Buy. They're gonna feed that to their families at home.
That's how it works.
Yeah, but speaking of family, we're going to be talking a little bit about parental rights this week because you weren't on when we were talking about. I'm not sure if we had a live stream back when Danielle Smith did her thing on parental rights. I think we did I think we were on Thursday.
I remember doing Richard's. I did radio. I didn't do.
It must have been on a Friday because we I think our last live stream was on the Thursday, the day before Danielle Smith came out in favor of parental rights and banning a bunch of procedures. And then everyone was pretending there's those very. I don't even think they're credible these days, but all those reports that Polyev and the conservative leadership are telling their MPs that you can't speak out about parental rights. And then he comes out against puberty blockers for anyone under the age of 18, which is actually the most hawkish position on that issue in the entire country. And then for some reason, the left decided that they were going to dump gasoline over top of their heads and light themselves on fire because I guess it's a great idea to oppose parents and their ability to raise their own kids. So
I thought Polyev had a very, very good line when questioned, like the second time, whatever. He was at one of those standing at a podium outside in front of a road at a factory where people are, a politician thing to do. And he was asked on this, and he broke it down, and he called the media out, I think, correctly on this, saying like, "What am I opposing? You won't even explain what I'm opposing because if you explain it, everyone's going to agree with me." So you just call these things transgender rights or whatever it is. You call it healthcare, and you won't explain what the policy actually is because if you explain it, you're going to lose. And I thought that was a really, really.
I liked in his first interview the way he baited them out, and he's saying, "Oh, what healthcare options are being blocked?" Because he's asking, they're saying, "Oh, will you condemn Smith? Will you condemn Smith?" Like, "Oh, what is she blocking? Oh, you can't give out puberty blockers." And he's like, "To minors?" And they're like, "Yes." Irreversible, and then you could hear like a pin drop because nobody wanted to acknowledge the realities of what puberty blockers are and what they do to kids who cannot consent to that kind of a powerful drug. And they just seemed like, and then it just became like this is the response after that. It just became and it just became like rabble inside the media scrum because nobody could figure out what to ask. And then when the next journalist spoke up, they're like, "So you're okay with banning puberty blockers for minors?" And he's like, "Yes." And then they kept asking him over and over again because nobody could think of an actual question.
No one could fathom that no one could fathom that someone doesn't think like them in the media. And that's what's such a stunning indictment on it. It's not, listen, again, Polyev was clever to say, "Hey, you don't want to say it because you'll lose." to actually like have them say it and think they'll win, like the bubble you have to live in. Like you have to be in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver. Like you have to have like a friend with a trans child whose the parents are like so gung ho on all of it. Like, we're saving lives. And like, that's the bubble you have to live in to think this is
It's literally
anyway.
emotional blackmail, but you're
Yeah.
not wrong. I actually believe the ridings or districts that the politicians come from who are most anti-parental rights, I guarantee the median age is way higher than the places that are most in favor of it. It's people in downtown areas of Toronto where nobody's trying to raise a family. It's really kind of old parts of the Maritimes, places like Vancouver Island. Like this one MP is from Randall Garrison. He's from like the north part of Vancouver Island or whatever. Or like he's like right up above where Elizabeth May is.
Some hippie hellhole that we should invade and liberate.
Yeah. So just cut it off from the mainland and let it float out to sea. But it's just like
I really hope clips are used against me and someday like Daniel Bordman wants to invade Vancouver Island. I'll be like, bunch of hippies. We're taking it back.
It's just that granola.
I'm putting up the statue of, I'm going to call the island Winston Churchill Isle. And we're gonna have a statue of Winston Churchill beside Sir John A. Macdonald, carrying a Queen Victoria on a falcon. Like that's what it's gonna be. There's gonna be 4 people carrying Queen Victoria on a thing in the statue: Sir John A., Winston Churchill, and 2 to be decided later by whatever makes my enemies most insane.
Ryerson.
This is my plan for Vancouver Island. Get ready.
Yeah, it'll be Ryerson and then the other guy.
Oh, Ryerson, yes, Ryerson.
Ryerson's
in there. Let's find out who's the fourth person or technically the 5th person in the statue. We'll let the chat decide.
It'll be Clarence
There's
Thomas.
3 people. People can suggest a 4th statue for me to make when I conquer Vancouver Island, and I am and then retake it. Like, what do we replace their city hall with? A statue of. It's going to be 4 people carrying Queen Victoria, one of them Churchill, one of them St. John MacDonald, one of them Ryerson, and a 4th man will be carrying Queen Victoria into
or Condoleezza Rice.
Condoleezza Rice was like the beginner. Like she started some of that appeasement on like Iran stuff. Like she's not a great statesman in my view. I'd rather do. I would get me in trouble saying that.
Don't worry about it. But there's something about places like Vancouver, and this is where the funny thing is the area. And I've said this before: the area that Elizabeth May and this guy Randall Garrison currently occupy as MPs. It used to be the Reform Alliance areas of the island. There is like a certain kind of a culture of people who will vote for very grassroots granola-y stuff. So they're not easily in like a way like, oh, they're stupid. Obviously not that. There's obviously hardcore conservative type people in those areas that didn't go in the Elizabeth May direction. But there are people who are like looking for very local naturalist type politicians. Not like they want them to believe in healing crystals the way Elizabeth May does. But it feels very grassroots, kind of plaid jacket type politics. And that's where you get a lot of these people in like the Maritimes who vote liberal, even though they literally hate all their values. But it felt like the local craft fair kind of a candidate. Like they want their candidate to feel like someone sewed them out of yarn, but like by someone's grandmother. Like that very much is like what I get the vibe of when I go to like, Nova Scotia and Vancouver Island and places like that.
Yeah, you have that. Yeah, so I think Poilievre did good. Finally, they bucked the polling came in and said yes, parents love their kids. Support them. So that is good. Now, one thing I will kind of we should give the PPC their sort of their flowers here. When it isn't fully right to say that Poilievre has the most hawkish position on trans now.
Means in terms of decision makers who can do
in terms of people in office, yes. I'd like to, because I think it's another interesting thing to bring up for the future of like conservative Canadian politics. PPC right about the gender stuff, but the PPC has been so hyper focused on niche issues. Like you couldn't understand it during COVID. Like COVID was a big issue, and they were running the end the lockdown stuff, and that drove a lot of traffic to the party. And then COVID finished, and they had to find something new. So a lot of it was the gender wars stuff and the trans thing, and that worked for them. They were able to slam the Conservative Party by being like going to conservatives and saying, "Hey, you care about this? Look what they're saying." Now with Poilievre like being on the record. Being like, no, ban puberty blockers for minors, and this is crazy. What do you think the PPC's new thing is going to be? Or do you think?
Well, and this is why I don't give the PPC a lot of credit, because it's kind of like the Teddy Roosevelt thing about the man in the arena. The PPC is not the man in the arena. They're kind of like the angry spectator jeering at people who are actually doing stuff. And then because they suggested something before the conservatives did it, that they like own that thing, even though they frankly didn't do enough to do. Yeah, the Great Dominion. Yeah, the Great Dominion is the guy in the chat who always tells us to get off the PPC stuff. But like the PPC was literally like posting, like Greg Wycliffe was saying like, oh, actually Jagmeet Singh's a leader, and like Pure Polyev's a B because Jagmeet Singh came out against the parental rights stuff, and Polyev hadn't said anything for a few days. Guys, this is where you look like an obvious front group for the Liberals. Not that they are, but if you want to stop having that accusation, do some campaigning. Actually get something done. Anyways, we will move on.
Let's find if they're gonna will their new thing be like the old school, hey, free trade in between the provinces, I'm libertarian Mad Max Bernier, like let's get the economy going? Or is it gonna be like I think screaming about immigrants is I think that's a new thing. I think it's
and the thing is that I'm fine with the idea that immigration has to be reduced. Obviously, it has to be reduced, but they keep getting caught up in basically like saying, well, the conservatives are saying that we're going to reduce it so that like housing prices like stabilize or whatever. And they're like, that's not enough. You also have to stop trading with these countries. It's like, oh goodness, I thought Bernier was the free trade guy, and I believe he is a free trade guy. I think it's just the influencers in the party have gotten to this like lunk-headed kind of nationalism where it's just being like, I'm in favor of my country and I don't care if I literally hurt myself to do it.
Yeah, just things. Yeah, and it's. I mean, they're not the most politically savvy of the Greg Wycliffes and of the world. Okay, anyway, so we have the trans stuff going on, and I think it's good.
I want to maybe play the clip of Randall Garrison now because this is probably the worst take in a very revealing way, and I think it's useful to watch. It's only 20 seconds. I'll cut it off early. Thank you for Rebel News for clipping this, or I wouldn't have done it because I'm lazy.
Do you view this as a parental rights issue at all?
Well, I'd like to say, first of all, there's no such thing as parental rights. In Canada, there are parental responsibilities. And in Canadian family law, the primary responsibility of parents is to support and affirm their kids. Children have rights in Canada, and these kind of policies restrict the rights that children have in Canada.
Like, imagine how stupid that is. That parents don't have rights. There's no specific
parental rights. There's parental responsibilities. And the number one responsibility of all parents is to affirm their kids. Whatever your kids say, the number one duty of Canadian parents, according to the Canadian government, the Liberals, is to affirm everything your kids say, no matter what. Like, mommy and daddy, I'm an airplane. Like, okay, not just like, ha ha ha, good job, Charlie. You're very cute. No, like you have to believe they're an airplane, and then you have to like all take them to the airport and like put 400 people on their back and watch them take off. Like, no.
Well, and the thing is, like, basically what he's arguing is that children have like a set of special rights, but parents are effectively employees of the government. You are your child's caseworker. You're here to show up and tell them that they're cool and they're allowed to eat candy as much as they want and do all this other stuff. But if you actually start acting like a parent, that's when you're doing it wrong. If you start acting like a parent, that's when you've exceeded your responsibilities, and now the government's going to come in and like take your kids off to some orphanage or whatever. It's so it's dumb. The idea that parents don't have rights.
Let's cut through the red tape here. And like, what are they honestly saying? Like, what they're actually saying is like the primary goal of the country is social cohesion to the values we direct. Right. The goal of education is to turn kids into activists, and the goal of parents is to help turn the kids into what we see as Canadian values or like Canadians, which in this case is not Canadians. It's like socialists.
And again, it's not a hyperbolic take. And he's not saying it outright, but effectively his argument is that your children are wards of the state, and it is basically that you are supposed to affirm whatever the state teaches in school, or you're doing it wrong as a parent. And because that's effectively what they're saying, is that you cannot oppose what is being taught in school, which is just a made up. When I say made up, I mean in the sense that it's a created curriculum that the government makes and updates every year. That becomes like the new gospel truth of what your kids should believe, and you have to basically affirm that, as if kids just kind of come up with things on their own and that parents should get in the way of them while they organically develop. Like, it's the dumbest theory I've ever heard from the anti-parental right side, pretending that everything that they come home with from school, that wasn't the school, that was just them learning that.
Yeah, fitting pages. Yeah, like the stuff in the schools, like that's just natural because our teachers are experts. They've been named experts. They have an expertise. They have a degree, right? And the parents don't have a degree. The parents aren't experts in education, so they should defer to the experts there. And and then their job is to affirm the children who are being essentially indoctrinated by the false experts. And it's a really sick mentality. Like when you break it down, like it's communism.
This is what
authoritarianism.
I've been able to convince a lot of center left people onto the side of parental rights. A lot of them are generally already on side with it because when it's 80% popular, there's naturally a lot of people from lefty parties who are in favor of it. Even the people who are a little bit unsure, it's like just explain the fact that should you as a parent be able to look at your teacher's lesson plan? Because they'll always argue, oh, the curriculums are public. You can go and see what's being taught. The curriculum is like the policy declaration to a political party. It's just vague details. It is just vagaries of what you generally have to do. But there are obviously teachers who can use the curriculum and stretch it in order to teach woke, crazy nonsense. And obviously, a parent should be able to demand, hey, can I get your curriculum or your lesson plans for your English? Your English grade 6 class. I just want to see what we're reading, what we're doing, what the classroom discussions are. And if you won't give a parent that, that's a little bit weird. Obviously, most teachers are good, but the problem is your child only needs one crazy teacher in order to actually be have some.
Yeah, someone's read that. Like I think, again, Terry makes a good point here. Of they let kids walk out for lefty causes, right? If you want to go Palestine or transistine, if you want to be a transistinian, you can skip school and transfer Palestine all day, right? You cannot skip school and protest the rise in the carbon tax.
I do want to point out that this is the turnout that they got in a lot of these schools, 1.5%.
Yeah, right. There's that, and a lot of this is astroturfed and hyped up on these different ways. But there's a wider problem that in the schools are now teaching ideologies, and there's been no pushback to that. And as someone, you brought up a good point, the curriculums are kind of vague. I remember reading the Ontario sex ed new curriculum. There was a new controversial thing in Ontario. It's back when I was, starting out doing this. And I remember I was the new sex ed thing, it was all, everyone was up in arms. And I'm okay, I'm going to read this thing. This is now my job. I'm going to read through this thing and do that. I'm inside the curriculum for the radical sex ed stuff, it doesn't have overtly a lot of radical sex ed nonsense. The actual crazy thing is I called it communist dodgeball. What the curriculum clearly outlines is the thought of equity. It's very big on equity and communist jibberty jabber. And yes, we were talking about we all get pretty hyped up around sex. We're a culture, sex sells. There's a reason why, girls with bigger breasts are more likely to be seen on a Super Bowl advertisement than those with really small. Okay, I'm not telling you any, right? Janet Jackson had a nipple malfunction. We talk about it 20 years later. Okay, we get that. But the real explosive stuff in the sex ed curriculum from Ontario is it outlined it was communist dodgeball. Gym class is now a communist training ground. That was the craziest stuff that was written in there. And for other stuff, you're right. It's just nebulous things of yes,
it gives a lot of leeway.
Consent and communist or critical theory coded language. It now said that should be part of all grade school. There was just this nebulous thing that it's sort of the focus of school should be about, promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, and, should make more socially conscious children. That was the whole thing. And at face value, it's oh, what's wrong with that? But what's wrong with that is that's not what schools are for. They're not for ideological training of the young schools. The universities at their best, it's the battleground of ideas where you're exposed to all different types of ideas and you deal with them and you train yourself to be more socially conscious and well-rounded in the humanities through rigorous debate, self and intellectual exploration. That's always been the philosophy of Western education, improvement by, rhetoric and study and conflict of ideas. This is now instituting that we have good ideas. We have moral ideas coming from the experts, all these sociology loon bags, and they will now be put in the schools as fact, like math and English. And
Well, and what they and you're right in the equity thing. Oftentimes, a lot of the way that they get crazy stuff through, and like I think Terry French said in the comments, is that 80% of teachers do not care. 10% of them are actually fantastic on these issues, and 10% of them might be like actively left wing. But the thing is, a lot of the curriculum just says we're going to teach for equity reasons. We're going to teach all perspectives, and that vague language allows them to inject basically crazy left-wing views, and the way that the left explains their own views is oddly appealing to children, because it's all about a level of fairness and whatnot that makes sense when you're a child who doesn't have their own money, and you just think that everyone, if someone brings candy to the classroom, they should have to give everyone candy. Like, obviously all this stuff is very appealing, and so obviously
I explained communism to my 4-year-old nephew when I was with him. It was kind of funny. It was a cute moment. I can show you the video. Maybe I'll send it to you.
He's not going to be part of the Red Guard anymore.
No, it was like, he's asking like, "Oh, Uncle Daniel, what did you do?" And like, I was telling him stories, and then like he keep asking for space adventure stories. It's one of the things I do with him. But like, sometimes you can only make up so many space adventure stories that you have to take like real life and like do it. So I like talked about, like, I was doing like the time, when me, Salman, and whatever, like we fought the communists and jihadis in the streets, and like went undercover on that. I took out jihadis from that. I was like, "Oh, who are your enemies?" I'm like, "The communists. Uncle Daniel fights communists in space communists, if you will." So he's like explaining communism for that, and he's like, "Oh, what's a communist?" I'm like, "Well, communists, they sound nice because they want everyone to be equal and everyone the same thing and everyone in the same place," which might sound nice. It's like, yeah, it's like, okay, like he's a very picky eater. Like he eats peanut butter and jelly sandwich, like peanut, not even jelly, like not 80% of his diet is peanut butter. He's 4, whatever. Okay. But I got to explain. I'm like, yeah, but in the communists, everything's the same. Like, what if everyone had the same lunch? Like, if the same lunch, like, what if we all had to have hamburgers for lunch, cheeseburgers for lunch? I like a cheeseburger. Daddy likes a cheeseburger. Mommy likes a cheeseburger. Do you like cheeseburgers? No. It's like, if you had to eat that, would you like that? No. So it was like, I got it. But then there's this cute thing where like, so we were playing around, and then like he sometimes takes me to jail because he's 4, right? And then
he believes that you're a bad, nasty person.
Yeah, he put me in jail, and then I'm like, "What am I going to jail for?" He's like, "You're going to jail because you're one of the communists." And then I have a video of being like, "Hey, buddy, why is Uncle Daniel's in jail?" He's like, "Uncle Daniel's in jail because he's one of the communists." I've never been prouder in my entire life.
Maybe you have to blur out your nephew's face, but you should post that on social media.
On social media, that I keep it. I don't want to use kids for political points and such media. But it was a funny story where it's like I did manage to explain to a 4-year-old boy that communism is bad, and then he spent the rest of the night sending commies to jail. So, victory.
Fantastic.
I got one. I saved one.
Fantastic.
I got 40 million more to go. I got one. Someone else get the next.
Well, here's the last thing I want to just mention on the parental rights thing, and then we can move on to some other stuff. But like and this is something I've seen from professors I had putting out, just other people who consider themselves big intellectuals. They're saying that what Polyev, Smith, Blaine Higgs, and New Brunswick are all proposing, it's actually restricting parental rights. Because did you know that you're restricting a parent's right to consent for their child to use puberty blockers or opposite sex hormones? It's like, oh goodness, you sweet summer child. That's not what's going on here. Yeah, I cannot consent for a child if I had a kid. I cannot consent for them to smoke cigarettes. That's stupid. There's certain things that you cannot consent for your child. You cannot consent for things that are like obviously harmful to your child's health, or for things that at the very least are not easily reversible.
Yeah, you can't sell alcohol to someone you know is a minor, even if their dad says it's okay. Like, that's still the law, right? I mean, yeah, these people are idiots. All right, do you want to move on to the next thing? How we don't support Ukraine because we want Ukraine to win? Is that
the conservatives supposedly are anti-Ukraine, and the media is pushing this, and the liberals are pushing this. Frankly, when the fact that the liberals are now trying to make like foreign policy issues their main electoral strategy of going,
good luck with that.
Conservatives, nobody cares about foreign policy. Me and Daniel are the 2 out of 7 people in this country, not by ratio, the 2 people in the group of 7 people who care about foreign policy deeply. Nobody cares about foreign policy. Nobody is going to vote for the liberals because they said bad things about the conservatives on Ukraine. Let's at least get that straight. And now let's just get into the lie that is the idea that somehow, Polyev is a friend of Putin and wants the Russians to roll tanks over the border and kill everyone. That's stupid. But did you ever see that interview from 2014 where Trudeau made fun of the Ukrainians getting invaded?
No, I haven't seen that.
It's literally French language, and he made a joke about how the Russians were building up on the border and likely to invade Crimea and the Donetsk, Luhansk and Donetsk areas because they lost hockey at the Sochi Olympics. He was making jokes about how I don't care that much. It doesn't offend me that much. It's the dumb joke, but his kind of posturing on Ukraine as if he's the only man who really likes Ukraine.
Yeah, this is what the problem we've had for a long time with the views on Vladimir Putin and Russia and Ukraine and all this. I remember 2014. Okay, I might look young. You might be younger than you look, but you came out of the womb, with a textbook in your hand. In 2014, prior to 2016, RT, Russia Today, Russian propaganda, Russia was a darling of the radical left. If you watch Russian TV, RT
still are quite a bit.
Yeah, and Sputnik and all the Russian disinformation, all the Russian bots. Prior to 2016, all of them were like, Bernie Sanders is great. America is evil. Here's Noam Chomsky. Here's Howard Zinn. Here's Bernie Sanders. Here's Ilhan Omar. And all these characters. It was and it was diversity, equity, inclusion, and everything's racist, critical race theory, woke nonsense. Russia Today was one of the most woke lunatic stations at the beginning of woke social justice war.
And it makes sense. AJ Plus is basically Al Jazeera Plus, and they're the hyper progressive arm of Al Jazeera, which is both funded by the Qatari government that is hyper anti-Israel, pro-terrorist, all this stuff. They're literally pro-Sharia law. And those people fund far left identity politics type things in the US and Canada.
Yeah, this is the thing. So I remember when Stephen Harper, went up to Vladimir Putin after the Crimean invasion and said to the world, I will shake your hand here, but you have to get out of Ukraine, right? That was pretty strong. And people don't remember that in 2015, both the Russians and the Chinese influenced our elections. No, I don't say it's the reason Trudeau won, but there was proven Chinese and Russian interference. They put their thumb on the scale to bring in Trudeau over Stephen Harper, right? This is that's a smart thing. I never watched RT. Most people are smart enough, I think, to go even if you think CBC's propaganda, well, it is again our view of CBC.
If the thing is, if you don't like the CBC, if anything, that should train you to be able to identify the crazy propagandistic tricks that are then used in other foreign funded media, the Gray Zone, Al Jazeera, RT. I forget whatever the Chinese ones are called. They always give themselves the most generic names ever. Yeah. The Times World or whatever.
Times World, Globe Now. This other thing. All these things are propaganda. So, Justin Trudeau, for his entire political life and the beginning of his political career, the first year of that, he was a pro-Russian, NATO's the problem. If the West wasn't so mean, then the world would be a better place. And again, this global, on geopolitics and foreign policy, what is globalism on the geopolitical scale? It's the multipolar world, right? It's Obama's multipolar world. Listen, globalism is different. And you can talk about technocracy and how it affects us here in Canada. Okay, fine. I get that. But globalist foreign policy is multipolarism.
Why do you think Putin literally spoke at every WEF event up until 2022? It's because he was very, very well liked for basically establishing Russian hegemony, because the WEF believes that different sort of dictatorships.
Just the West being bad.
The WEF believes in equity in such a way that they believe that America has too much power, and so Russia should have more power over Eastern Europe. China should have more power over Asia. Pakistan and Iran should have more power over their areas, except not Saudi Arabia or Israel. If you're a Western ally, that means you're scum. But so all these people believe that every left-wing socialist dictatorship should have more power than the West should in different areas.
Islamist dictatorships too.
Yeah, and the thing is that this is why. I always find it annoying when people are like, the Russia's anti-woke and capitalist. No, they're not. Try starting a business in that country. If it becomes successful, the Russian government will liquidate it from you and give it to an oligarch.
Yeah, that's the thing. So, all right, so let's get to this free trade thing, right? So the conservatives hate Ukraine now. Polyev is trying to shoot Zelensky in the face, and Polyev is going to start bombing, Kiev single-handedly. He's standing in Halifax, right at the tip of the ocean, and just throwing grenades as far as he can, hoping they hit Ukraine. That's what he's doing right now.
He's been eating a lot of borscht these days.
Yes, borscht. And it goes down to they're trying to sneak a carbon tax onto Ukraine for, again, stupid globalist reasons of whatever.
It's also just trying to bait the conservatives into a lose-lose scenario. If they vote for the package, they're like, so you think the carbon tax is good for Ukraine, but you don't think the carbon tax is good for Canadians. Or they vote against it, and now they're evil monsters who want Ukrainian children to die.
Yeah, and it's sorry, how is a carbon tax going to help Ukraine? So making all the fuel that Ukraine has to use to fund their artillery, to fuel their artillery and their cavalry and their tanks and and everything. If we make that more expensive for Ukraine, and we make sure that their weapons are solar and wind powered instead of gas powered, this will scare the shit out of Vladimir Putin, assumedly, right? Once Vladimir Putin knows that Greta Thunberg is going to be in Kiev building a giant windmill next month, he's going to run. He's going to run away. And the only thing that's stopping this is Pierre Polyev, because Pierre Polyev hates Ukraine and he hates Greta Thunberg and this windmill. And it's the most insane thing ever. It's this is what drives, people like us so crazy, as your classic right-wing, neocon hawks who are I'm down to support Ukraine. Show me some support for Ukraine and I'll support it. But instead it's just stupid virtue signaling, sanctioning Russia, without sanctioning Russia's proxies or any of the loopholes. The sanctions we put on Russia have gigantic loopholes that run through Iran and Venezuela and all these other allied countries. So they were never going to work. So, because I don't support doing something that's stupid, that obviously won't work. And then because that's going to give Putin a victory, because he's going to be you put sanctions on me, it didn't work. Okay, so I wasn't for it. And then what? I didn't want to close down the Russian orchestra in friggin' Toronto, and there was a Russian restaurant that I didn't firebomb. So I'm not what is this? This is our plan to support Ukraine? No.
Yeah, and that's because the left only knows identity politics. So whenever they start supporting people, it just becomes the dumb. They misread every single geopolitical issue because they read it through the lens of domestic politics. And this is where conservatives also have to avoid trying to read this through domestic politics and thinking, okay, Trudeau is supporting Zelensky. Ergo, Zelensky is woke and bad. And it's so silly. It's that's not how it works. If anything, Trudeau and Biden and all those people, they were the ones defunding Ukraine before 2022. Trump actually gave them way more weapons, way more per capita support. Obviously, Biden does more now because there's a war going on, but he literally took away all of their money because Joe Biden fundamentally believes that the West is a force for bad, and that's why they started basically pulling a lot of resources from allies around the world. And you can argue whether they should be giving that aid or not. That's totally fine. You can make that argument, but arguing that it's somehow the Ukraine is a bastion of the left is so weird. It's quite literally a more conservative country than Russia. If you were to start a business, or if you wanted to start a church, you'd want to do it in Ukraine before Russia.
Yeah, and Ukraine is by no means the bastion of
it's a corrupt country. No one's gonna argue that.
Not the perfect country. Again, that was another thing. We all have to just pretend, no corruption in Ukraine. It is the biggest bastion of Western civilization. You're well, that kind of feeds into some of Putin's talking points, which I thought were pretty interesting. It's nothing.
Yeah, so we can get into the interview a little bit.
Yeah, we can get into it. My sense on it is okay. Is Tucker Carlson the greatest journalist ever now that we must write a ballad about and build a statue of? No. Is Tucker Carlson an agent of Russia, a traitor to America, and should be banned from the EU? No. Okay?
That was the dumbest thing the EU could possibly do. Saying, we're not going to let him have entry. Now you guys look like the communists here.
Now you look dumb. You feed into Putin's propaganda. Putin pretty clearly understands the culture war in the West. He understands, J.K. Rowling, trans is crazy, free speech. Like, again, he doesn't have free speech in Russia. You could get thrown out a window, right? And
Yeah.
like, this is where it's like props to Tucker, okay? Props to Tucker.
He actually got potentially a journalist released maybe in the near future by challenging Putin on locking up like a Washington Post writer who's 21 years old.
He's absolutely running the journalist. That part at the end, he did push back. Like, that was good. Like, that part was good. And even on the rest of it, listen, it wasn't perfect, but that was the toughest interview Vladimir Putin has had to give ever.
If anything,
Probably.
Putin really buried himself at the very beginning, where before a single question he was asked, he was like, in like, you know, at the beginning of time, and then he just started like using that as like his justification. And like, here's the thing:
he went like on a diatribe about Russian history. Which,
listen to Putin's words very carefully on the interview. If you seriously actually listen to the interview and listen to what he was talking about, Putin is basically a woke land back leftist who believes that anywhere that a Russian has been or Russia has ever touched, that is their land and they have the right to take it back whenever. If you back Russia's opinion on this, give your land to a native person and leave Canada because you're a hypocrite. If you actually believe that's how law should work and how land should work. If you believe if a Russian's ever farted in a restaurant, it's down there.
It's not biolabs. It's not NATO encroachment. His actual raison d'etre like is, you know, yes, land back. There's Russian speaking people there. Like, you know, Hitler wanted to annex the Sudetenland because there's German speaking people there and the German speakers were oppressed there. So he's taking it back. And again, this is exactly the same thing I said about Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar supports Somali ethnic expansionism, right? Of
anywhere the Somali family has lived for at least a single generation is theirs.
Yeah, like wherever there's ethnic Somalis, Ilhan Omar believes that should be, you know, militarily controlled and taken over by Somalis, ethnic Somali. Like, even though there's non-ethnic Somalis in Somalia and there's like ethnic Somalis in Kenya and Ethiopia, like, you guys get it. Like, life's complicated. People don't always fit into borders. Like, people, like, I'm not saying anything you don't know.
And nothing ever has to be perfect. I hate this idea that, there's even by the way, when they actually had a referendum in Ukraine, if people want to be part of the Russian Federation or Ukraine, literally every single province they won. And it was close in Crimea, I would admit. It was like 60% voted to stay, 40% voted to not stay. But it's like we don't get to then say takesy backsies because we've seen some recent polling, so we get to march across the land.
Because every country has justification to go to war with every other country all the time.
Yeah, it's such a cluster to do that. So there's so supposedly pro-peace people who just want peace, and this thing could have been worked out if Ukraine just handed over its land. You realize that in that interview with Putin, he's basically saying everything, including Poland, is at least partially Russia's. And it's like, oh goodness, this is like insane when you actually listen to it. And people saying like, well, Putin's looking for peace. Did you not see the part where Tucker asked him about that? And he got extremely awkward about saying, are you willing to go towards an actual new peace deal? And he basically was like, they have to give me everything I want first. And I think like this real piece.
Jody makes a point. Like, Tucker really managed an interview because he wasn't wasn't only not a threat. He was an audience for Putin to play out his story. Yeah, like Putin understood that a large part of Tucker Carlson's audience is like anti-establishment, American isolationists, and he could work them. And so there's legitimate criticism for Tucker there.
I think Tucker did the interview well, but the way that the interview had been framed by himself and his network was that you're showing up to hear a bunch of hidden truths from Vladimir Putin when Vladimir Putin is equivocating like the worst politician you've ever seen in Canada. It's like the umming and the humming and hawing and going back and saying, well, when I was a 5-year-old, and just like going and doing all these irrelevant.
You don't like
Justin Trudeau.
I've been in charge too long in Putin's eyes. Like, I call it like Planet Hot Girl. Okay. Some people live on planet Earth and some people live on planet Hot Girl, and some young women can live on planet Hot Girl for a while. Like, young women are biologically inclined to spend some time on planet Hot Girl and not have it ruin their psyche. But sometimes it gets too much. Like, they can't leave. They don't want to readjust reality. They get all this crazy work done. Their mind falls apart, right? It's the same thing where it's like you have guys who go in and they live in planet Hot Girl, which is like, everyone wants something from you. No one's going to tell you you're wrong. Your time is like, for 25 years, you know, no one's been like Vladimir, like, hey, you're wrong. Like, how often, if you're not Wyatt, like, would you just like, if there's a pretty girl in the group, like talking about something and like how often does the pretty girl say something vacuous or kind of wrong and you just don't go like,
it is me, so I'm the type of person who just speaks up immediately. I'm like, you're an idiot, you're ugly. I'm just
yes, you're again. I said that's why I preface it. If you're not white, this is more a mental exercise for the audience, right? And men should not live on Planet Hot Girl for more than a month or so. Like it could be a nice little vacation, but like it will drive men insane. Like that's not the men are not supposed to live in a world where everyone, where they don't have to fight for like their space somewhere. Like, you know what I mean? Like you got to be in a thing where you can't be at the top. Like even if you're in business, like you should have like adversaries and rivals and like people to like, and always be challenged. Like that's good for us. Like, but when you become like leader of a country and you become like, you live on Planet Hot Girl for 25 years, you go insane. And you think you can start an interview with a 40-minute diatribe on history. Listen, I like starting. Listen, I had a talk last week and I started with like a couple minutes on an analogy about the Punic Wars. I've done it. I like doing it. So I get the impulse. To start with a bit of a historical diatribe before you go and make a point. Like I didn't do 40 minutes on the Punic Wars before I went in on all that. But like there was that. And like, so yeah, okay. And I'll give Tucker more of a break. He's like, okay, Tucker went into the Kremlin in Russia on Putin's home turf, where you know what? If he did,
obviously he's not going to be not going to like. No, you better answer this question. You like standing up and pointing his finger in his chest. Obviously, that was never going to happen.
Putin. Like there's
other journalists have given softer interviews than even Tucker did.
Yeah, like if you like listen, if Tucker went as hard as like someone on CNN is claiming he should have gone, he risked getting thrown out a window. Okay,
or the interview would have never happened because it wasn't live; it was taped, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like so he had to walk a point, and like I get it. Listen, you're going in 2 hours. You might not remember every point. Like, listen, you go in to do an hour of anything, 2 hours, right? You have points you want to make beforehand. Like you get a bit lost. Like you can't get to everything. You can't cover everything. Like is it fair to expect Tucker Carlson to make him a complete world-renowned expert on Russian history and modern military tactics? No, I don't think that's a fair expectation to put on him. So I do think, especially going hard at the end for a journalist, like, he might have gotten, he might have pushed the needle there for someone getting freed. In terms of, like asking questions, like, he got the world to see Vladimir Putin, right? He got people to be like, okay, you know what? If you're intellectually curious and you're kind of on the fence and you hear a lot of rhetoric from the far right and the far left on Ukraine, and you don't really trust the media because reasons A through Z, we all know them. You can go in, listen to Putin, go like, Russia is this, Ukraine is not real, we will take Ukraine, blah, 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 here Russian history, say all this stuff and like basically blame Poland for World War II. Like, you can be like, oh, that's because I think what Putin actually did a very good job of doing is I think he actually properly articulated the Russian war aims and war justification. Like I do think that like that interview was also meant for the Russian people. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And I think that he assumed that because there's Tucker's audience that they're geared up to assume that because they don't like Zelensky, that they will be willing to sort of buy what I'm selling. And so my reasoning doesn't even have to be that good because I'm trying to do this for both the home audience as well as make myself look like a more sympathetic figure. So like the entire time he's pretending like Russia's like the girl who's not allowed to sit at the popular girls table the entire time, and NATO's being mean to me and everything like that. Also, I hate that stupid talking point that they promised that they were never that NATO was never going to expand eastward. That's literally in no agreement. And even he basically said, oh, it was verbally promised. Okay, so then it wasn't promised. So the most important thing to you guys, you didn't ask to be put into writing. It's almost like it didn't happen. Even Gorbachev had to come out and say, yeah, that was never a deal. That was mentioned in a preliminary discussion year before we actually made a deal to basically reunify Germany. It was
and the
so long after.
not 1 inch eastward lie. The
Like,
great irony of that
just
is
ask people whenever they bring that up, name what the agreement was that was part of. They can't, because that's not an agreement.
it's not an agreement, but
have
do you know,
very
like,
famous
the
names.
organization that pushed that lie for the last 2 decades?
Yeah.
It's Tides. Was it the Tides Foundation? It was a Soros one. It was one of
Yeah,
the
no,
Soros.
it was a
think tanks.
Soros-funded organization that has
It was
been
like
doing
the
a lot
big
of Russian propaganda.
Soros think tank. Like that, NATO said they're not going to move 1 inch eastward. Like that was a thing. Again, Gorbachev said it didn't happen. It was like a mistranslation between English, German, and Russian.
It was some guy who
diplomats.
wasn't even part of the official
They
negotiating
This
team.
was like in
It
the
was just they were just throwing out policy options of maybe we can promise this, and they basically didn't care.
This was East Germany and West Germany. Like Germany was about to split up, and these were communists and Western diplomats spitballing in a pre-meeting, and then this all got walked back. But this not 1 inch lie, like that's a George Soros lie. Like if we're gonna do anything here, like again, this is what I'm saying. Like I remember 2014. Like I remember 2014 and 15. Like I remember where people were on Russia. Like I remember 2012 when Barack Obama made fun of Mitt Romney for saying, we need to be more cautious of Russia. And like, where'd you get your foreign policy from? The 1980s? Ha 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 ha. Like, I remember when I remember the same election cycle, or no, it was after midterms. It was 2014, right before the invasion of Crimea.
Yeah, also, by the way, why was it never mentioned in the interview why he invaded Georgia? Can anyone here explain to me in terms that actually make sense of why did Russia try and take over all of Georgia? That doesn't, there's literally no justification. It is a place where nobody speaks Russian in all of Georgia. People speak either Georgian or they speak versions of Georgian. They don't even look like Russians. There's literally a giant mountain that divides them so that you can't even get into this area without passing through small mountain passes. And they invaded anyways. That was never brought up in the interview. And the thing is that, yes, when you curate history, Putin will make a lot of sense when he is allowed to dictate all the terms of the discussion. If we knew nothing about Justin Trudeau, we knew nothing about him as people who live in Latvia or whatever, and then we're hearing some sort of him talking about the carbon tax or whatever, and we are not involved in knowing that a lot of this climate stuff is very dubious in its actual scientific basis. A lot of this, the carbon tax actually doesn't reduce emissions. And if you heard him with a translator explaining that the conservatives do not care about the environment, you might be tricked because you don't know what you don't know. And the thing is that a lot of the stuff and the funny thing is people themselves do not know Eastern European history and Russian history very well. And so on certain things Putin says, I was seeing people on Twitter saying, well, that's obviously wrong. And then because they don't know much about another topic you start talking about, they're like, but he made a lot of sense there, but I don't know a lot about that. It's like, maybe it's made a lot of sense because you don't know what you're talking about. And there's something. A lot of
his history is accurate, but again, it's you can pull, it's like lying with statistics, right? You could do the same thing with history. There's ways to if you know the statistics and you want to cherry pick stats to make an argument, and you want to cherry pick historical moments and omit others, like talking about how Poland was cooperating with Nazi Germany. Okay, but who was cooperating with Nazi Germany from 1939 to 1941?
And that's where people, and I saw someone in the comments say, well, yeah, Putin's been very anti-Marxist. It's like, no, he's not. Well, do you know where Putin was when the Berlin Wall fell down? He was in Eastern Germany complaining that the tanks should have rolled in and crushed people, in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, and
that is the type of man he is.
I don't think it's fair to say Putin
he's
is
not a Marxist. Exactly.
He's not a Marxist. He's not a communist, but he's
a socialist. If you actually look at the way the government is run.
He's a more, what do you say? He wants to revive the Russian Empire. It's not the USSR. You can pretty clearly see from Putin's interview that
he doesn't want he doesn't want Tajikistan or Turkmenistan. He could care less.
Putin sees himself more like Peter the Great than Vladimir Lenin.
Yeah,
and I think if Putin could choose a historical figure to be compared to, I think my suggestion would make him a lot happier than any of the Soviet leaders.
Oh, and that's why, and people don't even understand the mentality of many people in Eastern Europe. People, I went to Georgia. People talk about literally King George and all the other kings and queens they've had. They were literally people who just left office. They have a very long memory. But those same people who have long memories still think that all this stuff is crazy. But just because there's a different mentality of how people think in those countries does not mean it's like, well, now this is where I don't understand people buying into moral relativism. Well, the Russians believe it's theirs, so that's why they should have it. And like I've seen people saying stuff where like, guys, would you ever give the same leeway to land back activists who think that this is Turtle Island that we're currently sitting on and it needs to all be given back and like given into some sort of like trust system for people that we determine to be original Canadians? Like that's
like
weird.
Acadia needs to be returned to the Cajuns. Like when you take people from Louisiana and they can have like Acadia and that'll be under like, yeah, this goes nowhere. Let's talk about one thing for the country that Putin did mention. Putin did mention, right, Trudeau inviting the Nazi into parliament.
Yeah, right? And here's where Trudeau's such an idiot. This is the thing where I've said this on Twitter. I don't care about Putin's perspective on Justin Trudeau. I don't care at all. Putin's what you would get if you turned the woke down to like 1, but you turned all the authoritarian tendencies of Trudeau up to 11. But the thing is, Trudeau's an idiot, and he gave one of the best propaganda points of that interview to Vladimir Putin.
Oh, yeah.
That the idea that, well, look, even in Canada, they're inviting Nazis and giving them standing ovations in Parliament while Zelensky's there, and that proves that Zelensky's pro-Nazi and proves Canada's pro-Nazi. We all here, even if you're very conservative like we are, and we think Trudeau's an idiot and he embarrassed us, we all know that Trudeau's not pro-Nazi. But the thing is that from an outside perspective, that allows many people in Eastern Europe to think, wow, Canada and all these Western allies are actively pro-Nazi because they don't understand the context between Anthony Rota and Justin Trudeau's offices being so stupid that they don't understand what a Ukrainian World War II veteran who fought against the Russians means.
Yeah, and like this is why I don't take any of the left seriously. Like when like sometimes I would like, I would get attacked for being like anti-Ukraine because I have some conservative beliefs and people are stupid. Like, and all this. Like, and my frustration with Canada is like, we haven't done anything to help Ukraine. Okay. We haven't done shit. Like, we're not sending them the things they need. Like, we should be making ammunition. Like, my whole thing, I'm like, it's good for, like, we've learned that artillery is like still the king of the battlefield now. Like, precision artillery is the king. Canada should be producing lots of artillery ammunition. Why? Jobs here. It's incredibly valuable and people want to buy it. We have good manufacturing. It's solid. It's a geopolitical security and it's an economic security. It makes us more powerful and more influential. Like, we should, we should be, doing that. It's good policy. Okay. Then you have Justin Trudeau, who just doesn't understand the Russian perspective. Like, this is the prime minister. Okay. It's okay if like some random backbench MP from Vancouver Island doesn't understand foreign policy, but I'm sorry. Once you get in to this level, like, you have to understand the Russian game. And like, Vladimir Putin's whole thing, and again, like there's some history here. Like, a lot of the Ukrainian nationalists who started in what is now territorial Poland were super fascists and like anti-Russian, anti-German, and anti-Semitic, right? And they did this proto-Nazi stuff. And when Ukraine was getting its own identity, they kind of like amalgamated all pro-Ukrainian stuff. They didn't do any sort of like moral accounting like the Germans had to do and be like, oh wow, we killed a lot of Jews and we were part of the bad guys. We did some crazy shit. And you can understand that because they got genocided by the Soviets and the Holodomor. So they had their own thing. And like, they were kind of just, whatever. This is but some of those alternatives were like literal Nazis. This is a big part of like Putin's justification is the denazification because of like historically some bad people in Ukraine. If you invite a literal Nazi where Zelensky is, to be in the same room, I'm sorry. That's the greatest propaganda win of Vladimir Putin's entire career. And we just gave it to him.
Yeah.
So I'm not taking any lectures on these people from whatever. Yeah.
I want to go to David Edwards. He has 2 super chats for $2. Thank you, David Edwards. Budapest memorandum that was written down, and then he followed up saying, "So Putin has zero to complain about with NATO." And yes, like basically that was about the Russians signing on to military, like basically mutual safety agreements, and it had nothing to do with NATO, that agreement. But basically the Russians signed onto it, violated it. It was a lot about like kind of nuclear de-armament stuff, and the Russians have only produced more nuclear weapons and stuff like that. The Russians are not trustworthy on a lot of these issues. That's why Donald Trump was right.
A lot of the
start
stuff
milling
that the
more nukes.
West like backed and didn't abide by the deal, the Russians didn't either. Like there were a lot of deals signed between like again when the Soviet Union was collapsing, it collapsed. Then it was the Wild West. It was like oligarchs and mafia people and just like
And a lot of the
killing each other.
oligarchs are literally just the old Soviet commanders in the area or Soviet officials that ended up just saying, I already have this entire structure of business underneath myself that I own. So I'll basically sell some of my factories off to private businesses, but they basically work for me. So Russia's like one big unified country technically, in which basically old Soviet officials or basically new corrupt, almost proto-Soviet officials just rule massive sectors of the economy.
Yeah, do that. And
But
the
for
Nazi
people-
they
just
invited
for-
was a super Nazi. Like, it was a Waffen SS
and
Nazi,
just
which
for-
could be.
Can I just want to target this talking point? I hate this talking point. It's stupid, and you will lose people on your side as a conservative. Stop calling Chrystia Freeland a Nazi. Her grandfather was a Nazi. Who cares? I don't think she's an actual Nazi. The thing is, if you push that point, you're basically acting like a leftist and going to endorse the idea that if your dad or your grandfather was racist, you're now a racist. That's stupid. I don't tolerate any left-wing arguments, even if it's coming from right-wing people.
Can I add some, maybe an addendum and some pushback here?
Sure.
So I agree with calling Chrystia Freeland herself a Nazi is a good way to get tuned out. But calling Chrystia Freeland's grandfather a Nazi, I actually think is viable because
you can point it out in such a way that you're a hypocrite for going after other people for similar stuff.
Because if we go, oh no, Chrystia Freeland's
she's a Nazi, our government's run by Nazis, and it's like, stop, you're basically alienating people from voting for your ideology by basically make it seem like you're okay with slander.
Yeah, like, no, her grandfather was a Nazi. And I think it's good to point this out, that her grandfather was a Nazi. So when you point out the truth, that like, no, her grandfather was a Nazi, and she froze people's bank accounts. Both of those things are true. Yeah. What it forces her to then do is then the liberals, in order to save Chrystia Freeland, they have to either choose to, one, throw Chrystia Freeland under the bus, in which case, win. Chrystia Freeland, meet bus. I think most of us would be happy with the metaphorical busing Chrystia Freeland. Or the liberals have to cease fire on the, you know what? All white people are evil because, slavery existed in the 1700s, even though it existed everywhere. And, we were the first society as the British Empire to abolish it. But this and that. So, like, I'm with you. Like, yeah, calling Chrystia Freeland a Nazi, I think, is a losing argument. But calling her grandfather a Nazi, I actually think is a winning one.
Yeah. But that's where you can basically calling it out whenever she tries to basically say, hey, you once shook hands with this guy that I don't agree with on this thing. It's like, you're the granddaughter of a Nazi. That's a fine context. I just find that sometimes people repeat talking points until they start to kind of like just say it in the unfiltered manner in which they almost kind of start to believe it. This is where I always find propaganda from any side can be very toxic because it causes kind of disconnects in your brain between actual points you're trying to make and just things that you say. And the thing is that that's how basically conservative politics can become as lazy as liberal politics, is when we just start saying stuff because it's convenient at the moment. And so I always think that the way you're going to actually win moderate people over to crush the liberals in the next election is making the point that they're corrupt, they're dishonest, and you are honest on your own sense. Not that, like, would you ever go door knocking to any of you people saying this and say, did you know that Chrystia Freeland's grandfather was a Nazi? The person would just look at you like you're an idiot. And so make sure that you filter that out and start making good arguments about her being corrupt and her trying to bankrupt people and her closing down people's bank accounts and her, basically destroying the finances of the government. That's a way better thing.
Yeah. All right. What's next on the docket? We have Trudeau. We did gender stuff. We solved Ukraine. Is there any crazy lefties that you're going to force me to watch and react to? Is that our next?
I'm not going to make you do that today. Oddly enough, I was trying to find some. There was some video or something that I wanted to show you. At the very least, I guess we can mull over the fact that the Justice Minister, we talked about this at the very start, the Justice Minister of Canada, I want to look up his name because I don't know his name. I can never pronounce it. The new Justice Minister. So who somehow still in
Stephen Gibiblio 2.0. Gibibliot.
So it's Arif Virani. Arif Virani, the guy who said that O'Toole, like that. Sorry, not O'Toole. Polyev is an effing, tool in Parliament. That guy has now had his car stolen 3 times in 3 years. Car stolen the day after. The day after he criticized the Conservatives for making announcements about their wanting to crack down on car thefts.
I love it.
Canada is not a tragedy. It is definitely a comedy in terms of the way that this show works. Like, the writers have been doing a great job this year when it comes to writing the Canadian political show. I love it. I love when silly, mwah, I love it. It's amazing. And the thing is that I don't know why they made him the justice minister. It just demonstrates how empty the Liberal bench is. I'm not even sure if he's a lawyer, but he's just some pick-me guy for the Liberals who was going to be, the friendliest to Justin Trudeau, and that's why he's ended up as the justice minister. And he acts like a college leftist in his inability to hold back his emotions. But this is where
we did 5 minutes on this at the beginning of the show, so you can get that on rewind. But it was so great. It's like, no, these are not criminals. They're hardworking members of society. It's about economics, and people are poor. We need more socialism and free handouts, and because of Stephen Harper, people are that. And then he just keeps getting his car stolen. And the reason car thieves keep happening is because of our catch and release system. So there's no the punishment for stealing a car is negligible. You talk to police officers, they don't give chase. If you lift a car and then you hit the accelerator on the highway and you're going 150, 160, 170, 180, 200, they just leave you because, it's now too dangerous. So criminals know, A, if you get caught, slap on the wrist. B, you can avoid getting caught by breaking even more laws. So there's a whole...
And you get more people killed because you're incentivizing even more dangerous driving from criminals. Because criminals typically actually value their own lives, as stupid as they are. So if they think that they're going to be caught no matter how fast they drive, they're probably just going to take whatever the hit is in being caught now. Especially since there's no punishment. There's actually a big incentive to get pulled over if the police are going to chase you forever. If they have to. But RF in Parliament, this is where he went after Pierre Polyev. I maybe will go find the clip, but it's so pathetic. He's basically, the whole effing tool thing where he went after Polyev was on the idea that you haven't seen our government's new regulations and all the laws and things that the Liberals have been passing. It's on top of all this automatic bail, don't pay anything, don't even show up to court, we'll just drop the charges immediately. They're like, but we have a new task force to look after car theft.
Oh, a task force.
We are going to have a task force.
Is a task force going to be backed up by a committee?
Yeah. It's the idea that
so good. The task force will report to a committee. I'm liking this. Explain.
Yeah, we're almost these people believe that if you pass a piece of legislation that say car thefts, no, the car thefts will stop. It is like helicopter parents. They are the helicopter parents of criminals. No, do not steal. Do not steal. But I understand why you're stealing. But do not steal. No. And then they do it, and everyone's like, he's impossible to deal with.
If you steal, then we're no ice cream. Okay. If you steal, we'll still go out for ice cream, but you get 1 scoop instead of 2.
Yeah.
How does that sound, mister?
You get 2, but one of them has to be green tea, and I know you don't like green tea.
Oh, Donna with my favorite.
I know. I didn't mean you don't like
Yay! No lefty videos.
I didn't have. I've ran out of them. They got really boring after a while.
You mean 1 minute?
All the videos are the Pierre Polyev doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a plan. The left feels like unless you're passing stupid government nonsense, stupid, big, bloated government policies, it's not a plan unless it costs $1 billion. That legitimately is what they're such materialists. If your plan is cutting back on stuff the government shouldn't be doing and giving people back their own money, that's not a plan. That's the absence of a plan. You should be stealing money from people and spending it and just burning it.
Big government spending programs. And the Conservatives tend to fall into a lot of this in Canada. This is Doug Ford, right? Doug Ford plays this game too. Doug Ford played this game immediately. He's like, I want to show people I'm doing something. We're going to spend more than the Liberals when we come in 2018.
We have a conservative jobs program, and it's the idea that we're wasting your money on we're subsidizing more conservative friendly businesses instead of left-wing, non-for-profits or whatever.
But they're still subsidizing all those left-wing non-for-profits. So
they just didn't increase it as much.
Show me a communist or active terrorist supporter in Ontario who isn't supported by the government on every level. You can't. Like every communist or
Yeah, why do you think they
or
can block
Islamist
bridges
roaming the
every
streets
single
right
day?
now has connections to some organization that gets your tax dollars from 1 to 3 branches of the government.
Yeah. Oh, and maybe we can talk about a little bit about this because I don't really care about getting the RF clip or whatever. It's like he kind of says the whole swear offhand, and it's more so just him being wimpy in the face of Polyev having a good point. But I do want to maybe let's talk about the ArriveCan scam scandal going on right now. If you've ever seen anything about it, I think it's like 350. Maybe I'm actually undershooting this. I thought it was like $350 million was basically spent on and around the ArriveCan app that did not function, was barely ever used, not that it should have ever been used, and it was like sole source contracts all the way down, and the government basically created a new department just to manage the creation of the contract, and then everyone was paid like $150,000 to do no work. Like that is really like the biggest form of corruption in the liberal government. Every once in a while there's a wee charity type thing, but most of it's just creating new bureaucratic jobs within the government that do not appear like a scandal on their face. But when you just look at all these people and how their job descriptions have nothing in them, it's nuts. It's what happens in AHS in Alberta, probably what happens in Ontario Health as well. There are so many people who are managers of nobody. They get manager salaries, $200,000 a year, and they manage nothing. They don't do. They basically
one of the biggest problems in our healthcare system, if we can talk about other things, is bureaucracy in Canada. There are too many bureaucrats in the healthcare system. Like by firing 2/3 of the bureaucrats, you guys can get better healthcare. Like
even if there was
without adding a doctor or a nurse, without adding a single doctor or a nurse, taking away over half the hospital administrators will get you better healthcare.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. Here's what happened in Alberta schools, and I guarantee this happened everywhere else, although we have a much larger problem when it comes to wasted money. Even the funny thing in Alberta is that we're the most conservative people in the country outside of maybe like Saskatchewan and New Brunswick when it comes to social issues. But like we waste so much money. There's a reason we have the highest per capita funding for both our education systems and our healthcare systems. And we also have the longest wait times. We also have the youngest population. So in theory, we have the fewest number of people who are more likely to need to have to access healthcare. The problem is, and I've heard this from so many people who work in unionized jobs and these things, is that unions use administrative jobs, use administrative bloat in order to reward politically well-connected union members. Because once you move up to some of these positions, sometimes you have to stop being a union member because you're now in management. But those people remember who they got this job from, and they reward the union and they basically pander to them. And it's kind of like a whole buddy system. Janice Irwin is the poster child for this in the education system in Alberta. I'm not sure if you've seen her, super pro-Hamas, NDP, MLA out in Edmonton. She worked as a teacher for like a semester, maybe a year. She was a teacher. And then suddenly she's a vice principal of a school. And she gets paid way more money, does basically nothing, get a cup of coffee, walk around the school. Every once in a while get mad at someone for not being woke enough. And she was getting paid more. And yet we have a problem with class sizes being too big. We have like 35 kids in a classroom. I heard on Ontario they're freaking out because there was like 27 kids or 25 kids in the classroom. And in Alberta, the problem is not that there's not enough staff or money. It's that 50% of the dollars given to the Alberta education system is spent on something that has nothing to do with education. And when I say that, I'm being very liberal with what I mean when I say not spent on education. I mean like cafeteria workers, janitors, principals, teachers. 50% of the money spent on like the Calgary Board of Education and people who just sit in rooms and are paid like six figures to ruminate about policy. And there's like hundreds of people doing that. It's like such a scam. And almost
unions. I talked to them I have a cousin, a teacher, and like an aunt, and like when I remember when Doug Ford first got in, and like there's this propaganda that Doug Ford's screwing over teachers and this and that. I'm like, I finally got the balls to say the things like Doug Ford's attacking teachers. I'm like, I wish. I'm like, I wish he was going to war with you guys, but like, no, he's giving you everything you want. And you're still complaining because you're unions. Like, and like, they said like, you keep telling me, like, as my answer to teacher, like, you keep telling me, like, every year the kids are getting dumber. You keep telling me all the problems with the kids and the youth, and they're not as clever, and the tests are declining, and their attention spans are worse, and their ability to do basic math and English is getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And we keep spending more and more and more. Like, what do you think it is? Like, do you think you're doing something wrong? Like, do you think like is the status quo, like, do you think the status quo is working? Like, you think you just keep doing what you're doing, you should get a raise?
Yeah. And,
Like,
and
if
that's
you
what
keep getting dumber and you want to race, okay.
And that's what always drives me up the wall about a lot of red Tory conservative politicians. They'll run on knowing there's too much spending in these areas and it's being used inefficiently, and then they get into government and then they become like blind and they can't find any of the overspending at all. Like that's one thing. If that happens with a poly of federal government, I'll be like super ticked. If they get in, they're like, okay, we'll grow our way out of this debt and this like massive deficit budgets. Like, no. Just get rid of it. Like, just start cutting stuff. Yeah. I will say though, Global Echo saying school was made to create factory workers. Yeah, in Prussia it was, but I would say that that's kind of an overstated.
I wish it was. I wish our schools were teaching kids to build something in a factory, but it's teaching them to be trans and for Palestine. Like that's,
I would say that is a bit of like
Transylvanians.
Misnomer that like school does not work the same way it used to work in Prussia, and you're probably right. It would actually work better if they were making factory workers. Right now, it's acting like more like a do what you want community college where nobody makes you go to class, nobody actually teaches you anything, and everything.
Yeah, the honor system.
You're getting honor. You're getting like you get extra credit for writing correct correct opinions. So it'd be great. I'd like to go back to something. It would be great if we learned trades in high school. You'd actually learn a partial trade and figure out if you want to go to trade school. That's the good thing that Alberta is actually going to do, is that they're going to create a bunch of extra incentives to go into STEM rather than go into like arts. And I have an arts degree. You have an arts degree. Arts degrees are great if you know what to do with them. If not, don't get it. If you don't know,
we should be teaching more math in schools. Like Susie has 2 titties. She reads a book from a communist. She cuts off 2 titties. How many titties does she have left? This is the math we need the kids to be learning.
Anyways.
New world math.
Well, that was weird. Anyway, so
making Wyatt uncomfortable so easy.
I know. Well, you forget I'm running for office. Anyways, yeah.
Anyways, clip that
out. They'll clip out this part of me being like, shame. Anyways,
I just said Daniel.
Yeah, but yeah, no, like I don't know. Do you have any local stuff in Ontario?
It's Olivia Chowville. It's Chowtown. Doug Ford. We have Trudeau at the top, Fat Trudeau in the middle, and Olivia Chow on the bottom. Oh yeah. Here's a good question.
I was going to say that we're recalling Gondek in Calgary. Go find the Recall Gondek website and sign up to recall her.
Do you think that Putin was emboldened by Trump when he moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem and recognized Morocco's land claim to the Western Sahara? This is a high-level geopolitical question that I'm excited to get into. I'm not sure if everyone else is, but okay. I don't think so. I do not think that's what emboldened Putin, because the Western Sahara, like for people who don't know, like again, the Western Sahara is like Moroccans think of the Western Sahara like that's their Palestinians. Like, screw these people. They see them as like Algerian-backed jihadis, for better or worse, right? And pro-Western Sahara people like Noam Chomsky say, oh, they're innocent little forest creatures and oppressed, right? So on the left-wing spectrum of the world, the Western Sahara is like the oppressed and Morocco is the oppressor. No one really cares because they're all brown. But the Moroccan point of view is like, this is a illegitimate jihadi-backed Algerian AstroTurf movement that, the Western Sahara is never a thing. It's under claim of Morocco. And because the left was more Western Sahara, it's had some geopolitical troubles doing that. So Trump moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israel territorial claims over the Golan Heights, that's all sort of like Middle Eastern, stuff. And I think that was good towards the peace process. I think it actually deterred further aggression because it showed that the U.S. will back its allies. Like, I think that's good foreign policy, backing Morocco's claim on the Western Sahara and Israel's claim on Jerusalem and the Golan Heights. I actually do think this is good foreign policy, right? This is America and Donald Trump backing their allies, saying, okay, I've written an article. I remember I wrote one like back when this happened under Trump's thing. Like, I wrote an article of like international law in the Golan Heights and like, why it's a silly concept to pretend it's still part of Syria or whatever. So those have been my views for a while. It's good because it shows like America's willing to back his allies. And then the Morocco Western Sahara part, recognizing the Western Sahara was how to get Morocco, which is a decent player in the Middle East, in North Africa, under the fold of the Abrahamic Accords, under American influence. So I actually do think though both of those moves brought Middle Eastern countries and non-significant countries, listen, not not China level, not superpowers, but it helped bring two countries, legitimate countries, under the sphere of American influence, which I think strengthened America and thus weakened Russia. So I think I would argue it had the opposite effect. I would also argue it didn't. Neither move had too much to do with Ukraine. But if we're gonna, I
think the Great Dominion just had a good point that it's not like I think that the only thing Trump did that would have maybe emboldened Russia was his initial pullout of just some troops that were basically monitoring the border in Syria that allowed the Turkish government to go in and try and kill a bunch of Kurds. That was a bad move. They corrected it. And so that basically taught Putin that even if Trump makes a mistake, it will be very temporary. And I think really the thing that emboldens places like Russia is how frankly pathetic the West was about Afghanistan, about the idea that, like, think about it this way. Even if you think America shouldn't be the world's policeman, all that stuff, fair enough. That's a very reasonable perspective, that America shouldn't have to go around basically protecting everybody on, like, you know, from foreign adversaries. Fair enough. Once you're in Afghanistan and it's literally costing the U.S. only like 1.5% of their overall military budget to keep some American troops like in like not Tehran, what is it? Sorry.
Kabul.
Kabul, sorry, it's K. It's like in keeping them in Kabul, and all they were doing was they were hiring some contractors to refuel Afghani jets, the government's jets, and do maintenance on them, because Afghanis were trained to fly them, but they didn't really have the sort of hyper-experienced engineering background ground crews to keep them to keep them basically like fueled up and ready to go. That's when Biden just pulled all of that support out. That's when things went to hell in that country. The Americans could have actually fully left. All the troops could have left, and they could have just basically kept paying contractors very small amounts of money to just keep all of the doing maintenance for the Afghani army. That's when everything fell apart. Biden pulled those people out so that the Afghanis couldn't even get their own jets in the sky. And then so basically they took away all of their advantages against this force of basically people in Toyota trucks. And so then because they obviously know that they're less willing to die than the Taliban fighters, they got scared, and then the entire army collapsed because it didn't have any of the support, and it was just going to become old Western style gun battles for the rest of the war. And that's really what made Putin and China feel like they can start flexing their muscles a little bit more, because the West is not going to help. And like, again, remember under Trump, all the people who want to say like, okay, Biden, like the Democrats are the pro, like Ukraine ones, the Republicans aren't. The Republicans gave way more money, way more weapons to Ukraine, Georgia, all these Eastern European countries. And like with Iran, because Trump, like when he hit Qasem Soleimani with a missile, it made it very clear that he was willing to like punch hard if he had to. And that's where Putin, Xi, Kim Jong-un, all these others were like really silent when he was president.
Trump took out Russians in Syria. Like,
yeah,
he also like kind of asked
230 Russian mercenaries in Syria because they were basically firing on U.S. Positions and allies and around there. And then literally, I even heard the story that from like, again, it's not because literally everything Trump did was great. There's a lot of mistakes, but overall it was still quite well done. Is that whenever he heard that the Russians were basically firing on American positions and like basically seeing what they could get away with, they just blazed them all in the desert.
Yeah, like, and it was smart because they went to like Russia, like, do you have any troops in Syria? They're like, no Russian in Syria. Like, he's like, there are no Russians in Crimea.
They're like, are these your guys? Oh no, those aren't our guys.
Okay, and then
and it's just like,
so we're gonna kill them all, and then they killed them all, and then the Russians learned, oh, okay, maybe don't shoot at Americans.
Yeah,
under Trump, we should adjust. I know we brought this up, but Doug Ford is not a conservative. He swings from Justin Trudeau's
stuff.
That's
why
I agree. Listen, I've been calling him Fat Trudeau for years now. I got it to trend kind of on Twitter once. It was a happy moment for me. But yeah, I agree. I mean, I was so excited. If you like look at the stream, I'm not even sure it's up there, but we did a stream. Me, Sia, Mika, and the crew did a big stream for the Ontario election 2018. I was so excited to get rid of Kathleen Wynne. Like, Kathleen Wynne was the worst, and I had a nickname planned out for Doug Ford. Like, I had an affectionate nickname for when he started fighting all the commies. Like, if he was a Doug Ford he promised and like was like, all right, we're taking on the commies, I was going to nickname him the Duggernaut, right? kind of like the Juggernaut, but like, it
A
would
little
play
bit
on
more
he's the
Doug.
bad guy, but he's unstoppable, just bursting through all this commie nonsense. It'd be like, no, I'm willing to do some Doug Ford propaganda right now. I hate Kathleen Wynne. Let's fix Ontario. Like the green energy stuff is nonsense. The carbon tax stuff is nonsense. But then he spent more money than Kathleen Wynne and didn't do any of the things he said he did. So I did not give him the Juggernaut nickname. Instead, I nicknamed him Fat Trudeau. So.
Yeah, and this is why if you live in Ontario forever until, even as a threat to the Conservatives, because this is how you get, if you want the PC party to recover, even if you're like, well, I don't want the Liberals, the NDP to win. Okay, Doug Ford is barely an improvement on them. So the best thing you can do is vote for the New Blue Party. Become a member of the New Blue Party. Make sure that you actually threaten the power of the PC party, and maybe they'll actually, straighten up and fly right. Or maybe the New Blue Party can win some seats in the future and hold them in a minority government, anything like that. At this point, you gotta, it's like with the O'Toole era of the Conservative Party. If everyone just got behind O'Toole, everyone turned out of their homes and voted for him in all these swing ridings, and he won a minority government, it would actually be far worse for the Conservatives than right now with Trudeau having his third sort of mini term or whatever, his third term that he's probably going to try and get at least 3 years out of. It would have been far worse for him to become the leader, because that would have been the new direction that Conservatives would have gone in. He would have been very easy for Justin Trudeau to come back and beat in the next election, and he would have basically destroyed our entire donor base, because it would have been proven that Conservatives don't do anything, or at least it would have been proven in people's middle class Canadians' minds. Oh, there's no point in voting for the Conservatives because they don't get anything done. This is why the PCs ended up in the woods for 20 years after, or not quite 20 years, but quite a while, with after Brian Mulroney and Kim Campbell. They had proven that there was no reason to vote for Conservatives because there was barely any better than the Liberals. Frankly, the Liberals are actually more conservative than they were. And so we had the party split issue. So if you don't want to have a party split, you actually almost need to threaten a party split. That people always end up blaming the symptom of bad conservative politics for the result, or for why things got bad. Things are bad. Like the Reform Party and the Alliance, it wasn't because of vote splitting killed us. Vote splitting happened because the Conservatives basically dared them to.
Yeah, that was the thing. And there might have, if O'Toole was still leader of the party,
Yay.
The political landscape is very different if O'Toole is still the leader. Again, shout out to the Freedom Convoy, anyone who honked a horn 2 years ago today. Knocking out Aaron O'Toole did a huge service to the country, among all the other great things the Freedom Convoy did, which we don't need to name all of them, but we will give a special shout out for finally pushing Aaron O'Toole off the ledge.
That was the best thing that could have happened to the Conservatives, because it had a demarcation line against at least that intense form of red Toryism. There's some red Tories in the party. As much as I rag on them, there's a few that I'm okay with. Michael Chong is very good on certain issues. Melissa Landsman, actually, she's very blue on certain things, and then she's more red on certain things. I'm fine with it. She represents a certain constituency who votes Conservative. Fair enough. I don't like it when you get red Tories in ridings where obviously the riding is actually very blue, and this person basically just got into it, or they're trying to get a nomination. Tons of people in my area, super pro censorship during COVID, pro lockdown, anti-conscience rights, all of these people, and they're running in a really blue district, and it's kind of dishonest. Anyways, I just want to get to this one because I think it's interesting to talk about. He said that true, but Pierre Poilievre is still a lifetime public servant, because Angus said Poilievre didn't grow up with silver spoon in his mouth like Trudeau did. I would say, though, and maybe you would disagree with me, I'm not allergic to career politicians, and by definition, Poilievre is a career politician. He's also very good at it. I am pro good politicians, because that's where I don't actually like term limits. The idea of term limits for MPs. Maybe would good things happen from it? I don't know. At the same time, you're probably still going to get the same sort of grifters who get in, and then when their term limit is up, they're basically handed off to their friend, and they hand it off to their friend. I want just good politicians in politics, and I feel like term limits have been used as a scapegoating of problems. Oh, it's because we don't have term limits. Oh, it's if we had term limits, we get rid of the bad people and we get good people. Well, are you going to buy a membership for the Conservatives and engage and make sure the next nominee is Conservative? Oh, well, I don't want to have to do that. Not that that's what you're saying, OCIR, but that happens with some people where they think term limits, and you didn't even say anything about term limits. But there's some people out there who think that term limits are the lack of term limits are the root of all evils in Canada.
No, I get the argument, and to an extent, like, listen, I do not like a lot of I hate most politicians, and this is a fact that's been very public about my life. But I do recognize the value of someone who can play politics well, and care about the country. Like, listen, it'd be nice if we didn't have any politicians, but like, life will give you politicians. Like, politicians and bureaucrats will emerge in life. You do need someone to lead the country to like understand some of the skills. Like, listen, someone knows how to, like, if Poilievre's going to be a good leader, he has to understand the Game of Thrones of Canadian politics, right? Like, you're going to need a sense of like when you're being handled, when you're being talked to by proxy, like how to say something to be interpreted in a way that is strong and play games, but say something, but not say something, but imply with the statement. And like, yeah. And is this like the sleazy part of life? The like, yeah, maybe.
Here's the
but
thing, and people don't understand this, is that, and this is why I recommend watching Stephen Michael Davis's series on why Bernie Sanders lost in 2020, and he basically explains all the progressive nonsense about basically saying the establishment rigged it. There is a reason, and people don't seem to get this. There is a reason why Mitch McConnell has been reelected so many times. There is a reason why Lindsey Graham has been reelected a lot of times. There's a reason why Nancy Pelosi has been reelected a lot of times. It's because they actually do represent their areas quite well. These people are actually fairly in touch. Every once in a while, you'll get a clip of like Mitch McConnell getting like yelled at by someone in a diner. But he actually does he's actually popular for a reason. And it's not because the establishment tricked anybody. It's because that's what those voters want in that area. Nancy Pelosi, when you actually do look at that area of San Francisco, represents her people pretty well based on what they want.
Yeah.
And I find that
people like, and like, yeah, in San Francisco country, that the place that wants people shitting on the streets and doing heroin. And she gives them street shitting heroin. Like,
and that's where you have to understand that if you want to win, and this is where Rob Ford is such a good politician. Rob Ford became the mayor on probably a lot of issues that nobody would have won with if he had just run flat out right after he had like gotten, or before he had gotten into council. It's all about narrative building and making sure that you can convince people over to your side. The reason why Mitch McConnell, and I'm just using him as an example, I don't have any animus against him. I'm not pro, anti, I don't really care. The reason why he's popular there is because he speaks to the issues that people care about, and he has good answers that they support. And that's where Rob Ford won in Toronto, the most out-of-the-box candidate to be the mayor of Toronto. And it's because he figured out what people want, or he was able to convince people over to his side, and he ran on that. And that's how he
won. And there were a bunch of lunatic lefties running around being insane, like trying to turn everything into a bike lane. Like literally when Ben Bankis and I did a parody of like, there'll be no more cars, everything is a bike lane. That was literally like Toronto politics circa 2011 when Ford got in or whatever. Like literally like a talking point in Toronto politics in like our media and whatever is like, should we kill everyone with a car? Well, there's different ways to do it. We could kill everyone. We could also execute them, which might be better, or we could put them in jail and take their cars away. And our bikers, like this was like, there was literally a thing where like a biker attacked a driver and he drove off, and the biker like held onto his car, and then he like pushed him off the car, and the biker died. And like everyone was like, we need to kill this person right now. Like bikers' rights. Like literally, it's like that was a big thing. And then like Doug Ford was like,
Rob,
we're bike lanes, guys. And everyone's like, yeah.
Rob Ford.
I did say Rob Ford. Yeah,
Doug Ford.
Ew. So Rob Ford came
Doug Ford mandated everyone to ride a bike.
We're saving Jarvis Street. We're going to make sure there's no bike lanes on Jarvis Street. No more of that stuff. Here's a random tax we're going to cut. Let's effing give it.
Anyway, yeah. But my overall point is I think that online politics has made talking about how politics actually works sometimes like difficult, because I believe people believe in like the hot-blooded, quick hit hashtag kind of politics. And it's like, go talk to people at their doors. People are really basic. Not in an insulting way. I just mean that what they want is pretty standard. It's and you can appeal to people if you phrase things right. It's never, this is where the PPC doesn't understand politics, and I will get off this topic in 5 seconds, is that just being intense and saying that and talk about how your opponents are so corrupt doesn't mean that people want you. You actually need to make the pitch of why people should want you. And again, I think that people sort of look at establishment politicians and they're like, well, it's probably because of corruption, or they tricked people into voting for them. sometimes that definitely happens in like some nominations for every party where it's just getting a bunch of community individuals to show up and cast a vote for someone because of like very surface level reasons. But in a lot of areas, it's usually because that person worked harder than the rest. They knew the issues of the community better. This is why Poilievre's actually doing really well in Newfoundland right now. And he's beating people like Ken McDonald in the 338 projections are showing because he was actually pro seal hunting. That's a very minor issue that if you're in Vancouver, you would never think is a good thing to run on. You'd think, well, I've seen the documentaries on this and it's evil and it's terrible. It's like, go to Newfoundland and say that you're against it and they'll probably kill you. I'm kidding, but you get my point. It's like if you actually if you don't understand this and how much like fishermen are actually getting their like fish stocks destroyed by the fact that nobody culls seals anymore, it actually is a massive issue. And that's actually what I've heard is the reason that Poilievre's popped up like 10 points in Newfoundland.
Yeah, let's go clubbing. Let's go whack some seals on the head. Let's do it.
Yeah. There should be a dance club themed seal clubbing themed dance club.
That's a great date, guys. If you're looking to take a girl, like, listen, especially if you're in Toronto girls, they've seen it all. They're a bit stuck up, whatever. You take her to Newfoundland to club some seals. That's a date she's going to remember.
Yeah, when her dress gets sprayed by blood, she'll be like, "Whoa!"
And when it works, and jumps your bones immediately. I assume I'm invited to the wedding, the many different weddings that I've inspired in the last few minutes. So I would like a position of honor at your wedding. That's all I ask. That's all I ask.
Oh, one last thing we can talk about, and then we'll wrap up, is Justin Trudeau. I've already said this in a video. Justin Trudeau appointing a literal Conservative Party nomination candidate as his candidate in Durham to run against Jamil Javani. If you live in Durham, go vote for Jamil. He's actually a fantastic Conservative, I've heard from behind the scenes. Really good guy. And the guy he beat for his nomination, Robert Rock, the most transparent opportunist I've ever seen. Right after losing, it wasn't that Jamil got appointed. He just lost because he's really not that conservative, and everyone could tell. Jamil's an actual fiscal and social conservative. Right after, Robert went over and just hit up the Liberals and said, "Hey, I'll be your candidate." And Trudeau, because he's a moron. This is where people like Justin Trudeau is not a tactical genius. This is why Justin Trudeau is not going to win in the next federal election. He does not know. He picks the wrong people. He's literally picking a guy who 3 months ago was ripping into him as a corrupt prime minister and who should be removed because he was running for the Conservatives.
Like, all Jamil has to do is clip out all the things he said in the Conservative Party race against him to win the Conservative vote, and just have that go around in his riding, and people go, "Oh, okay, so he thinks Trudeau's corrupt, and now he's running for the Liberal Party. Like, what a schmuck!" Like, Jamil will wipe the floor with him.
And if you lived in that one turnout, because I want it to be the biggest defeat ever, I guarantee their reasoning for backing the Conservative guy, the Liberals, is that they probably thought he had better data than one of their own homegrown candidates. So I think that they're thinking that, well, maybe he's fiscally conservative and they know they're going to luse. They're hoping to perform better than they did in 21. And having the media then spin that into...
Maybe. My read, tell me if you think I'm wrong on this.
Okay.
I think they wanted to do a media campaign to counter the Conservatives being like, people are defecting from the Liberal Party, show that, people are defecting from the Conservative Party to the Liberal Party because the Conservatives are so toxic, the Conservatives are in trouble. I think they wanted to do the narrative that people are defecting from the Conservative Party.
I think this is a Yaroslav Hunka situation where they heard, former Conservative nomination candidate. That sounds really good. Thinking it was like 2011 that he ran a nomination, and now he's running for us. And he's like, no, it was literally 3 months ago.
Literally 5 minutes ago.
It was literally 5 minutes ago. No. He's just you guys are just his second pick to the prom. And this is also how red Tories work. They will run for whatever party is more likely to win, but they usually will favor Liberals if they can.
We're doing it. We're closing out on the Super Bowl picks.
I have nothing to say on this, so I'm just going to do that.
Wyatt, you can do your I don't like the Super Bowl. Is that your thing?
Wyatt, I don't know about football. I have no clue.
He doesn't know about football. Okay.
I hope the football gets I hope there's a lot of touchdowns tomorrow.
Thank you. That would make it more entertaining.
Okay.
I am rooting for the Chiefs, okay? Because one, I'm a Packer fan and I just can't on the 49ers, but two, I love the Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce conspiracies now, okay? I love it. I think it's a nice conspiracy. I think it's unifying. I think it's like sort of old world meets new world. It's like a social estuary in a way. It's like nonsense celebrity gossip meets insane conspiracies. And I think that's the new age. So I'm happy that this is what's going on. I like the fact that I found out that Taylor Swift's music is owned by George Soros. Now, I was just told that in this true spirit of this conspiracy. I did not check that in the slightest, and I'm not going to. I'm just going to assume that Taylor Swift's music is, in fact, owned by George Soros. Travis Kelce did get the Pfizer shot. So because I like this conspiracy, and yes, I was annoyed that they kept showing Taylor Swift all the time on the broadcast, but because I enjoy this conspiracy theory, because I like people screaming about Taylor Swift and the Chiefs and the nonsense, and is the NFL rigged, and is it fake, is it a deep state psyop, I like that. I think it's a new form of conspiracy that can bring people together. It can bring teenage girls and celebrity gossip heads together with like everything's on the deep state. So I think it's a good way for us to. So I'm cheering for the Chiefs and Taylor Swift because I think it will make the world a better place.
Good. That's fantastic to know.
That's my Super Bowl take.
I like the idea that people have been putting forward, and it's true that what is it? Yeah, it's absolutely true. The idea that if Taylor Swift and Travis, whatever his name is, I don't really care. I've already forgotten as of 5 seconds ago. Travis Kelce, if they get married, there's going to be like a crazy amount of marriages around the country because now all we care about is whatever Taylor Swift does, and there's like an entire subsection of people who only do what she does. Although it was funny when she was pushing voter registration for Biden in 2020, there's only like 35,000 people who actually registered to vote, which is a crazy low ratio considering that she has like 200 million followers on Instagram.
Taylor Swift doesn't move the needle politically. So this is again why I don't really care. Like Taylor Swift saying vote Joe Biden doesn't get more than 150 votes for Joe Biden across the country spread out. Like, and that's at most. So like, no, I don't like Taylor Swift doesn't move the needle politically. And like, you could do the conservative thing and be like, no, it's actually good. Like Taylor Swift should be dating an alpha male. She's a successful female. Travis Kelce is a Hall of Fame NFL tight end, and it's a more romantic thing. And like, it'd be good if they get married instead of always being in these so-called situationships and, you know, be with a boyfriend, you know, who, you know, doesn't like there's a conservative argument to be making that like, you know, it's actually like a win for conservative values is Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift thing. You can do that, but that's boring. And we're going to go with the deep state owns Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift. The NFL is fake. They're trying to get you vaccinated.
This is why you should watch curling. It's not fake. The only non-fake sport where men are men.
Yeah, but I enjoy the conspiracy. I enjoy watching people freak out and lose their mind. I enjoy watching 14-year-old girls who love Taylor Swift get really mad at like lunatic conspiracy theorists. Because both groups can't be reasoned with. Like, what's more powerful? Like, people who think literally everything is an insane conspiracy or a mob of 14-year-old girls.
Sounds like it's a psyop.
Unstoppable force, immovable object. And I want to see this. And in order for this to happen, I need the Chiefs to win. So that's why I'm cheering for them.
I bought this new banker's chair, and I like how I can look like I'm just kind of like floating around the screen.
All right. Well,
I've explored this enough, and now
that was the most announced sports Wyatt has been around in the last.
I only watch curling sometimes and weightlifting. I like seeing people lift 3 times their body weight.
How about the lumberjack Olympics? It appears
it's always the weirdest countries that are in the weightlifting. It's like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan and Georgia and Armenia, and like everyone does not look like they could compete in any other sport because all they've learned to do is lift. And better athletes than me.
Weights, take steroids.
Yeah. Anyways, that should be it for us today, guys. After this video is done being live, you can go into the comments of it, of like the recorded version, and you can leave any topics you want us to talk about next time, next week, anything that's more timeless, and we'll totally do that. So other than that, like, share, subscribe, all those good things. Suggest video topics. I like to hear it all. And yeah. That's it. And I'll force Daniel to make a video on Canadian politics this next week.
Okay.
Yeah.